Go.
Chapters that are a part of every Spider story. Canon events are the connections that bind our lives together. We break enough canon, save enough captains, and we could lose everything.
Later that same evening.
You're the original Anomaly! A spider that gave you your powers wasn't from your dimension! It was never supposed to fight you!
Miguel, don't!
There's a world out there with no Spider-Man to protect them because it bit you instead. You're not supposed to be Spider-Man! If you hadn't been bit, your Peter Parker would have lived. Instead, he died, saving you. You would have stopped the collider before it ever went off. Spot wouldn't exist, and none of this would happen.
Tactical nuke incoming!
Originally, this was meant to be a full review of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. That video is still on its way, but as I was writing the script, I realized this part of the review would need its very own video. Understand, I don't hate Into the Spider-Verse, as some people seem to think I do. Quite the opposite, in fact. While I think the original film is vastly overrated and has its own set of issues that I'll be sure to talk about in my full review of its sequel, despite its issues, it's still very much a good Spider-Man film with writers that actually seemed to care and who most definitely had their hearts in the right place. It's a movie I've gone back to watch countless times and I've enjoyed it countless times. And as a result, Across the Spider-Verse was actually the movie I was most hyped to see for this entire year. But this movie has such a massive problem with its plot that it basically killed my whole experience after watching the film after I had some time to reflect on it. Because Across the Spider-Verse, no pun intended, is literally such a universe-breaking, story-fumbling, monumentally stupid, and almost divinely ironic plot-hole-ridden mess that is broken in so many ways that I just had to talk about it exclusively. I walked out of Across the Spider-Verse initially having mixed feelings about the film, but it didn't take long for me to realize I had just come out of the theater having witnessed an immeasurably disappointing movie. I don't care how many perfect review scores this film seems to be getting from the masses who have given such little critical thought whatsoever to the implications and the consequences of this movie's awfully constructed plot and what it means. This movie has a lot to answer for, and so do its awful writers and Sony as a company that almost nobody is talking about. So, you know what? I'll do the honors.
Forgive me for being blunt.
Across the Spider-Verse is one of the dumbest plot holes of all time. And what I'm referring to, as some of you can no doubt guess, is the quote-unquote canon event breaking rule, which the word ironic doesn't even begin to do justice to. That certain events must be allowed to take place in the multiverse to prevent the space-time continuum from collapsing. Meaning there's constants for each and every single Spider-Person in the multiverse that needs to happen. It's predetermined, it can't be meddled with, otherwise everything will fall apart. This is such a pathetically contrived plot device that's trying to force conflict into the film. And this all starts in Mumbattan when Miles Morales saves the police captain that was meant to die in that moment. Because according to Across the Spider-Verse, a police captain close to Spider-Man supposedly dies in every single Spider-Man universe.
Event ASM 90. A police captain close to Spider-Man dies, saving a kid from falling rubble during a battle with an arch nemesis. That's how the story's supposed to go.
Hence, breaking the quote-unquote canon event when Miles Morales saves his life.
Inspector Singh's death was a canon event. You weren't supposed to be there, and you weren't supposed to save him. That's why Gwen tried to stop you.
Okay, there is so much wrong with this, and I'll get to it momentarily, but first of all, the use of the term canon in this movie is so cringe.
They are the canon. Canon events are the connections that bind our lives together. Inspector Singh's death was a canon event. It's what happens when you break the canon.
It's like trying so hard to be meta because it knows it's in a story, and yes, I'm well aware the original Spider-Verse got a lot of its charm from poking fun at the meta. No one's denying that, but this is something next level because this isn't a joke that can be played off for laughs. It's an entire plot point with very heavy implications and consequences for the story and other Spider-Man stories as well. And second of all, the circumstances surrounding the would-be death of Inspector Singh completely contradict the very idea that that was a canon event, since the only reason it almost happened in the first place was because the Spot, a multiverse anomaly like Miles, invaded Mumbattan from across the multiverse and caused that universe's super collider to malfunction and the Alchemax building to collapse, which, without their invasion, wouldn't have killed Inspector Singh otherwise. So that's the first issue with this whole canon event nonsense, and I'll come back to other universes possessing super colliders in a bit, but let's continue. Miles meddling in a quote-unquote canon event is what gains him an audience with Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099. Gwen Stacy takes him to the lobby where the Spider Society resides, and we get introduced to hundreds and hundreds of Peter Parkers and Spider-Man variants from across the multiverse, including some very unwelcome cameos from other continuities, most notably Donald Glover as the MCU's highly speculated Prowler from his minor role in Spider-Man Homecoming that was never officially confirmed, and unfortunately now meaning the Spider-Verse film series shares continuity with the ever sharply declining MCU. Wonderful! More on that later on. But this film also tries to butter up the audience with the inclusions of canons they know the audience will actually enjoy seeing referenced, like the Spider-Man PS4 game, Spectacular Spider-Man, as well as the Raimi and Mark Webb Spider-Man films. But this also raises a ton of issues that I'm about to mention, and excuse me for taking my time with this because I'm really setting the stage here, but keep that all in mind as we finally come to the meeting of Miles Morales and Miguel O'Hara. Miguel tells Miles about the canon events that every Spider-Man must go through, how a police captain in this instance must die at a certain point in the timeline, and then in order to sell this as an actual constant throughout the multiverse, they show the death of Dennis Leary's Captain Stacy with Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker from The Amazing Spider-Man 1, which is so forced and so ridiculous and honestly disgusting that they would very disingenuously use one of the only other few continuities where a police captain close to Spider-Man unceremoniously dies, and he doesn't even die the right way as described for the canon event. Dennis Leary's Captain Stacy gets stabbed, not crushed.
A police captain close to Spider-Man dies, saving a kid from falling rubble during a battle with an arch nemesis. That's how the story is supposed to go.
I got this, Peter. Go!
And use this reference as a means of pretending like this is a normal thing that happens in Spider-Man's journey? That this has to happen, that it must happen, that it's predetermined to happen, which would explain why it happens so often in Spider-Man stories when A, it actually doesn't, and B, this is flat out fucking ridiculous. But hey, wouldn't you know it, this is why Miles' dad is getting promoted to police captain, and was a heavily emphasized part of the story that took up a whole hefty chunk of screen time earlier on, when everyone was probably screaming internally for, hey, Lord and Miller, can you hurry the fuck up with the plot and get to the shit that matters? But all this has been done to forcefully manufacture the drama of Miles having to choose whether or not to let his father die and creating a conflict between him, Miguel O'Hara, and the Spider Society, which wouldn't have fucking taken place otherwise.
My dad is about to be captain.
Like you took everything from me.
When does it happen?
In 2 days. When he's sworn in.
The actual fuck. Promoting Miles' dad out of nowhere just to force him into this contrived plot point that breaks so much canon, ironically enough, because the death of a police captain is a now 100% must-happen canon event that needs to take place in every single Spider-Man continuity that this film stupidly tries retroactively to be a part of. Gee, where's the footage of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man failing to save Captain Stacy? His universe is still intact. Where's the footage of the MCU's Tom Holland Spider-Man failing to save his Captain Stacy? Oh, that's right, it never fucking happened. You know what is a far more consistent tragic event that takes place in Spider-Man continuities that even this movie acknowledges? The death of Gwen Stacy.
In every other universe, Gwen Stacy falls for Spider-Man. And in every other universe, it doesn't end well.
They were happy to reference the Amazing Spider-Man continuity and the death of Captain Stacy. Gwen Stacy, however, also dies in that movie's sequel. Would that not be considered a quote-unquote canon event that cannot be broken? Which is funny because I don't seem to remember the space-time continuing collapsing when Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man managed to save his Gwen Stacy from falling because he's such an absolute Chad, he didn't need a do-over like Garfield did. Shots fucking fired. But they didn't use that because they knew they couldn't use that because this whole canon-breaking bullshit is such an idiotic plot device that breaks continuity and was a complete load of crap to begin with, designed to force a bunch of very idiotic drama to happen. And the reason they didn't use the traumatic event of a Spider-Man's uncle dying instead, which is a far more constant event that keeps happening in the multiverse, is because Miles already had his traumatic loss and character development with his uncle, with the death of his uncle Aaron in the first Spider-Verse. It's like, oh, we can't use that, so I don't know, let's just shove his dad into the mix and create this really contrived plot fucking canon event nonsense to justify it. To use the Amazing Spider-Man 1 as an example, Captain Stacy's death was tragic but also earned. Trying to retroactively tie it in with this canon event-breaking nonsense plotline as some predetermined thing that has to happen in every timeline is not only nonsensical, but it ruins the very thing about the multiverse that makes it such a unique concept to explore, which is that any scenario can exist. Yes, there are some similarities, sure, but they aren't binding the fabric of the multiverse together. That's just fucking retarded. The similarities in various universes are not meant to be the product of some grand design that eliminates the mystique of each universe, as well as what makes each Spider-Man and their respective journeys unique and special. The similarities are meant to be a product of sheer coincidence and nothing more. That's why retroactively trying to tie all these multiverse stories and Spider-Man continuities in with this canon event concept has the polar opposite desired effect. By trying to tie everything together in the most succulent sense of irony, you've opened up more problematic holes than Spot himself, who is also a deliciously ironic villain given what this movie tries to do and ultimately allows it to backfire spectacularly on itself, and on every other Spider-Man continuity that it tries to be a part of. And speaking of those other continuities, this gets even worse. While Miguel is divulging all this exposition to Miles, all the different Peter Parkers slowly close in around Miles to trap him from escaping because they all agree with Miguel O'Hara that he can't save his own father and they won't allow him to. Even the friendships he made in the original Spider-Verse, all of a sudden, every single one of them is just in on this lunacy except Miles. And so Miles, logically, fires back with the question of, what if this was Uncle Ben? What if it meant saving Uncle Ben or maybe having the multiverse collapse because of this canon-breaking nonsense?
Good question.
And then Peter B. Parker, of all people, talks about how Uncle Ben and his death from the perspective of a comic book nerd trying to summarize the character of Spider-Man rather than from the perspective of Spider-Man himself, saying that without Uncle Ben, so many Spider-Men and women wouldn't exist.
If not for Uncle Ben, most of us wouldn't be here, Miles. And all the good we did, it wouldn't have been done.
Oh my god, my insides are on fire!
Completely glossing over the fact that the whole reason Uncle Ben's death happens in the first place is because of Peter being irresponsible with his powers, which led to the death of his uncle happening, which profoundly changes him and his whole outlook on life. Not some prophetic, all-encompassing canon bullshit. The whole reason Spider-Man exists is to make sure the death of Uncle Ben never happens again, or at least trying his damnedest to. And now Peter B. Parker, Penny Parker, and Gwen Stacy, and all the other Spider-Men and women in the Spider Society turn on Miles to try and stop him from going back to his own universe and saving his father because the multiverse might collapse. Bullshit! Also, kind of unrelated to the canon-breaking stuff, but since we are already talking about this part of the film, I'll mention it. Across the Spider-Verse takes place just 16 months after the events of the first Spider-Verse. Meaning Miles Morales is still far from, shall we say, seasoned as Spider-Man at this point. He's still got much to learn, more experience to be had, and yet this movie wants you to buy that he can plausibly escape from hundreds of other likely more seasoned Spider-Men and women who are more technologically advanced than him and likely have much more fucking experience than he does, as well as Spider-Man 2099 for that matter, and he does so starting off while he's surrounded by them in the middle of their building headquarters? Again, allow me to reiterate. Bull fucking shit! And this is what I was internally screaming for the entire duration of this chase sequence. Well, that and what the fuck did these idiots and Sony do to Peter B. Parker? Like, seriously, what the hell?
Look how they massacred my boy.
He's a borderline unrecognizable retard compared to his character from the first Spider-Verse, but I'll save that rant for my full review. Moving on, towards the end of the chase sequence, Miguel O'Hara corners Miles, and as if enough damage hadn't already been done, he calls Miles the original Anomaly for what's going wrong with the multiverse. The Spider-Man who should never have been bitten in the first place. Everything's going wrong because of him. He's the reason that his universe's Peter Parker died. He died because the spider that bit him came from Universe 42, and that universe was left without a Spider-Man, which led to its own set of repercussions for that universe, and so every event that's gone wrong with the multiverse, including Spot himself, is all because of him.
You're the original Anomaly!
Let's pause here because there's something else I need to address about this line and Miguel's character before we go any further. See, in the continuity of the Spider-Verse films, Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, was introduced to us back in the post-credit scene of Into the Spider-Verse.
The multiverse didn't collapse.
Oh, cool. Okay, so we're just gonna roll the dice on this?
So what do you say, pal?
Let's start at the beginning, one last time. I just told you that. Listen, I'm from the future.
How dare you point at me?
Now, a lot of people, myself included, were very confused about Miguel's sudden change in demeanor in Across the Spider-Verse. Going from a charming, charismatic, snarky do-gooder who doesn't take himself too seriously, into his more grim and depressing antagonistic self in Across the Spider-Verse. Some people justify this with the trauma Miguel has experienced that profoundly changed him in the time gap between the two Spider-Verse films. However, Into the Spider-Verse doesn't exactly line up well with Across the Spider-Verse in a myriad of different ways, but to stay on point, Miguel was apparently watching over the multiverse during Into the Spider-Verse, observing the events of Kingpin's Super Collider going haywire, opening up the multiverse, and then having Miles close it. His AI says that they avoided disaster and that the multiverse didn't collapse.
I was gone for less than 2 hours. What happened?
The multiverse didn't collapse.
Oh, cool.
And only then does he obtain the multiverse wristwatch that allows him to transport himself freely throughout the multiverse.
Hey, did you finish the goober?
It's not a goober, it's a gizmo.
But you could be the first person to make an autonomous multiverse jump.
Okay, first off, Spider-Man 2099 is basically portrayed as like this multiverse law enforcement in these movies. So why was he even watching the multiverse if he had no means of traveling throughout or having any effect on it whatsoever? Essentially a multiverse cop without a means of traveling throughout the multiverse. Okay, look, whatever, that's actually besides my point, which is that he gets this device after the events of Into the Spider-Verse. The multiverse is apparently safe, and that would appear to be that. However, Across the Spider-Verse would have you believe that Miguel has been at this multiverse, spider cop, canon-breaking prevention crap for much longer than the timeline has room for. His traumatic backstory, which we will soon talk about, as well as recruiting the entire Spider Society with hundreds of Spider-Men and women and animals as well, mind you, as well as mapping out all this universe canon and capturing all those anomalies from Kingpin's Super Collider, that was, according to him, supposed to be the inciting event for all of this chaos, despite the fact that the Into the Spider-Verse post-credit scene said that the multiverse was saved, with no mentions of destabilization whatsoever. Remember, according to Across the Spider-Verse, all of this was supposed to happen within 16 months of the events of Into the Spider-Verse. Press X to doubt. Which brings me to the crux of the issue, which is that Miguel O'Hara, despite what some people believe, wasn't character developed from Into the Spider-Verse. He was instead very likely retconned and repurposed for this new plotline that the writers wanted to tell. which would explain the reason why he talks to Miles like he's been at this job for a very long time. Like he had his tragic backstory happen years ago. Like the Spider Society has been functioning to preserve order in the multiverse since before Kingpin's collider went off. Which is why I'm going to go on a few tangents throughout the remainder of this video about Miguel's remarks to Miles as quote-unquote the original Anomaly. More on that in a second. But I think Lord and Miller were just hoping the audience would buy that Miguel's character just changed over a course of time due to his tragic backstory in the Spider-Verse sequel. But in actuality, he has very much changed from the direction they were very much likely going to go in based on the events of the original Spider-Verse and the post-credit scene that Miguel O'Hara cameoed in. Lord and Miller have in fact admitted that they wrote this film in a deliberate attempt to spite certain fans who weren't particularly fond of Miles Morales as Spider-Man. More on that later. But the reason I bring it up is because it would definitely lead one to think that they changed their plans after the release of Into the Spider-Verse, and especially when you consider the lack of cohesion between Spider-Verse 1 and 2, including the canon-breaking plotline as well as the character of Miguel O'Hara. Right, sorry about the tangent. Again, I'm just setting the stage here. Now, where were we?
You're the original Anomaly! Spider that gave you your powers wasn't from your dimension! It was never supposed to fight you!
Miguel, don't!
There's a world out there with no Spider-Man to protect them because it bit you instead. You're not supposed to be Spider-Man! If you hadn't been bit, your Peter Parker would have lived. Instead, he died, saving you. You would have stopped the collider before it ever went off. Spot wouldn't exist, and none of this would happen.
Okay, wait. Hold the fuck up, because this could not be any more stupid, especially coming from Miguel O'Hara. As far as the events pertaining to Miles' own universe, that being Earth 1610, what Miguel is saying is mostly true. Oh, we will come back to that. But in terms of the wider scope of the multiverse being in crisis and Miles being the first anomaly, given how Across the Spider-Verse chooses to portray Miguel's character, the implications of his tragic backstory, his long history with trying to stabilize the multiverse, the formation of the Spider Society, and the ridiculously short time gap between this movie and its prequel, when you take into account all that, Miles being the first anomaly is incredibly hard to believe. Because according to Miguel O'Hara, anyone who crosses over into a universe they do not belong in is considered an anomaly.
Is in these laser cases?
Anomalies. Folks who wound up in the wrong dimension.
Everywhere you go, you're an anomaly. You're the original Anomaly.
And while his motivations for trying to stop Miles make sense given his past, as we discussed, the canon event-breaking plotline is incredibly dumb, and the reason why Miguel O'Hara is trying to stop Miles is because he's seen firsthand the consequences of what trying to change canon events can do to a universe, where in an admission of guilt, he explains he tried replacing another version of himself in another universe, and that universe, as a result of too much canon being changed, was ultimately destroyed.
It's what happens when you break the canon. Because I broke it once myself, so I replaced it. I thought it was harmless. You break enough canon and save enough captains, and we could lose everything.
Meaning Miguel broke the rules of the multiverse first, and Miguel was the original anomaly who caused an instability in the multiverse long before Miles did.
You're the original Anomaly.
What the fuck?
Meaning all of his accusations against Miles are completely dumb as fuck. Not only that, but because Sony, in their infinite lack of wisdom, and insistent on sucking Marvel and Disney's continuously rotting dick, decided to retroactively tie in MCU continuity with the continuity of Into the Spider-Verse. Meaning the events of Spider-Man No Way Home and Peter Parker's really stupid request from Doctor Strange's dumbass spell led to anomalies happening and the multiverse destabilizing before Miles destroyed Kingpin's Super Collider, unless this movie is insisting that Miles destabilized the multiverse before the events of No Way Home, and then there's the multiverse of madness to consider, and not to mention Loki, and the fact that Miguel mentions Doctor Strange by name when he first meets Gwen in Across the Spider-Verse.
Really fun cleaning up your shocking mess, by the way.
What mess?
Kingpin's Collider. Now I'm stuck putting every everybody back where they belong before all of time and space collapses. Don't even get me started on Doctor Strange, a little nerd back on Earth 1999-99.
And let me just stop here and cast the middle finger at Sony, saying this is why you don't attach your entire separate self-contained IP and its continuity to the fucking MCU, or any other continuity for that matter, retroactively, because that's a surefire way to fuck your continuity straight in the ass. Spider-Verse was just fucking fine on its own. It didn't need any of this, and it was all the better for it. But attaching this to the MCU would have been bad enough when the MCU was good. The MCU is currently in freefall. There's a reason why people in the lifeboats were rowing away from the Titanic and not towards it. Sony, you dumb fucks, why would you do this? Seriously, the person on the board of directors who okayed this idiotic decision, whoever the fuck they are, he or she needs to fucking go pronto. Because you just fucked up a relatively fine and thriving continuity by attaching it to garbage. However, that being said, and more to my point, apparently producer Phil Lord had nothing but giddy excitement at the idea of joining Kevin Feige's sinking mothership. So maybe this dumb decision wasn't all Sony's doing after all, but the irony behind this particular tweet is also nothing short of delicious. And it goes like this. Quote, Marvel has given us a lot of rope to hang ourselves with. Oops, silly me, my brain was still switched on. Let's try again. Quote, Marvel has given us a lot of rope to make MCU connections. It has been a very fruitful collaboration. Kevin's a big admirer and just believes a rising tide lifts all boats.
Wow.
Yeah, I wasn't kidding when I equated the current state of the MCU to the Titanic. I suppose the analogy isn't lost on Kevin Feige either, since he's basically saying to Sony and to the Spider-Verse team, yeah, we're kind of running out of clout here. Can we borrow some of yours? And this absolute jackass cucked to Feige like a dog on a leash, as did Sony, and way to go on signing your franchise's soon-to-be death warrant, because everything the MCU and fuckhead Feige touches turns to shit. It's just a damn shame you don't all fucking know it yet.
Everything burns.
And this film has already made great strides towards that. As I said, Spider-Verse was better left on its own. A rising tide lifts all ships, you say, Mr. Lord. True, but a sinking ship drags everyone down, ass clown. Now finally, here's one more thing I wanted to mention regarding how and why the multiverse is falling apart, and why that is from Miguel's perspective, and because according to him, that all of this is happening because of Kingpin's Super Collider in the first Spider-Verse film. Now again, at the beginning of Across the Spider-Verse, Miguel tells Gwen that he's stuck cleaning up their mess after Kingpin's Super Collider threw the multiverse into chaos.
Really fun cleaning up your shocking mess, by the way. What mess? Kingpin's Collider.
Again, this is despite the fact that he caused an entire universe to be wiped out from existence, which, okay. But what I find curious about this is that, again, when they travel to Mumbattan, there is another Alchemax with yet another Super Collider, meaning that Kingpin's Super Collider couldn't have been the only inciting incident for setting the multiverse out of balance, because, logically speaking here, there's more Super Colliders out there in the multiverse, which likely should have been activated along with the Super Collider from Earth 1610. Meaning, this was going to happen anyway, and shouldn't these events have happened before the events of Into the Spider-Verse? And again, why is Miguel putting all of this on Miles when he broke canon first and caused the whole universe to be wiped out, which I'd imagine did much more damage to the space-time continuum than anything the Super Collider could have done? In regards to the canon event-breaking bullshit, which again was stupid to begin with, because again, the canon that Miles apparently broke in Mumbattan is because of an anomaly who invaded that universe and brought about that event to happen in the first place, meaning the supposed canon event that was always supposed to happen was complete bullshit. However, Miguel does point out during his fight with Miles that the Peter Parker from Earth 1610, that being Miles' universe, was meant to stop the Collider, which would lead one to believe by this film's own logic that the stopping of the Super Collider is indeed a canon event. And in all the other universes that Spider-Man is supposed to stop the Super Collider, including the Super Collider in Mumbattan, where the Super Collider only goes off because of Spot, who was an anomaly, remember? And without him, the Spider-Man from that universe would have stopped it. further making the supposed canon event of Inspector Singh's death nonsensical. But more to my point, if Spider-Man is not supposed to stop the Super Collider, then that's going to lead to the multiverse problem getting exponentially worse, with colliders going off everywhere, likely before and after the events of Into the Spider-Verse. But returning to my brief mentioning of Peter Parker failing to stop the collider from Universe 1610 being a canon event, because this is what I've spent the whole video building to, in fact. This is the big one. Now, I've seen some Spider-Verse fanatics cook up some wild shit in a feeble attempt to make sense of a lot of these plot problems, picking and choosing what canon needs to be broken in order for the multiverse to unravel and collapse, which is pointless because this movie is also picking and choosing what canon needs to be broken, whilst also using some pretty clear cut and dry examples of even just one canon event breaking being enough to lead to absolute chaos in the multiverse. For example, Inspector Singh not dying from an anomaly, might I add, and calling it a canon event, which led to a whole opening in that universe that started to collapse. Miguel O'Hara just raising his alternate self's family was enough to make the entire universe collapse. Which again, I would imagine that did a lot more damage to the multiverse space-time continuum than Kingpin's Collider in the first Spider-Verse. Point is, it doesn't take much, according to this film's own rules, to destabilize the multiverse. And all that being said, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, and this is the deal breaker, might I add, there is nothing these smooth-brained, fanatical fuckwits can say or come up with that will ever plug this movie's biggest plot hole, which is the fact that Miles being an anomaly breaks the entire premise, ironically enough, of this whole multiverse canon-breaking plotline bullshit. Miguel O'Hara says that Miles is quote-unquote the original anomaly.
You're the original anomaly!
Tactical nuke incoming!
He also goes on to say that the spider that bit him was never supposed to bite him.
A spider that gave you your powers wasn't from your dimension! It was never supposed to bite you!
Tactical nuke incoming!
He says that Peter Parker in his universe was never supposed to die, and the Collider was never supposed to go off.
If you hadn't been bit, your Peter Parker would have lived!
Tactical nuke incoming!
You would have stopped the Collider before it ever went off. Spot wouldn't exist, and none of this would have happened.
Tactical nuke incoming!
Meaning the rift in the multiverse that Miles supposedly created, press X to doubt, that event wasn't supposed to happen. So Inspector Singh not dying from an anomaly is breaking enough canon to unravel the multiverse, but Miles being an anomaly and breaking dozens if not hundreds of canon events for the Peter Parker in his universe leaves Earth 1610 completely unscathed. Get fucked. By this movie's own retarded logic, Earth 1610 should be a fucking black hole by now, and we haven't even discussed the other side of this coin, that being Earth 42. This universe had its radioactive spider stolen by Earth 1610, leaving Earth 42 without a Spider-Man, and basically fucked up the entire universe's Spider-Man canon from start to finish. Which means that Earth 42, like Earth 1610, should have fucking imploded on itself during the events of Into the Spider-Verse. But nope, they're both fine, because Lord and Miller decided to cook up this bullshit canon crap after the original film, and tried to tie that in retroactively with the continuity that they had already established, as well as other continuities as well, and in doing so, basically fucked the very definition of the word continuity to pieces. It's funny how none of this was brought up while Miguel and the Spider Society were stupidly grilling Miles about having to let his father die because of this contrived broken canon bullshit that again was only cooked up to incite drama between Miles and Miguel. And of course, this room full of geniuses, remember, would just outright ignore this very blatant contradiction to this logic because it would have created this movie's plot and its drama if it had been. And the only time it's brought up is when Miguel is trying to stop Miles, but once again ignores the very heavy implications of this because it completely flies in the face of the plot and this movie's canon-breaking multiverse collapsing logic, or lack thereof. And people are speculating that the sequel might fix some of this stuff, but as I said, they've already set the rules for breaking canon. and collapsing the multiverse. They're just picking and choosing now when it applies because they didn't have the foresight to think about this ahead of time when they were making the first Spider-Verse film. And since this movie was admittedly a direct commentary on fans who dislike Miles as Spider-Man, and was written with the direct intention of spiting them...
Was there any degree of that story that was meant to be a sort of commentary on the fans who don't see Miles as a real Spider-Man?
Yes, absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. The idea of like canon and the
rules and who rules, gets to be.
And Spider-Man, is it definitely is like a character that is owned by the audience. But some of that audience takes it so seriously and is trying to enforce and restrict. I remember when Miles Morales comic book first came out, there were people who were rejecting Miles as a character, for their reasons, not how we think it should be. And we wanted to talk directly to that and actually almost stick it to that mentality of, no, anyone can wear the mask. And if Spider-Man is a character that is owned by the entire world should be represented in that character. Right.
I have no doubts these producers and writers will probably hear some of these criticisms before Beyond the Spider-Verse comes out, and they'll cook up some more contrived BS to justify their picking and choosing of when canon breaking applies, when the only real reason is that the canon event plotline is just a plot hole written mess and nothing more. But even if they try to rectify this, I'm telling you, the damage is already done. Without the canon-breaking plot they've established, there's no drama between Miles and Miguel, rendering most of this movie pointless, and with the canon event plotline that they've established, well, the movie's plot, rules, and continuity are all but completely nonsensical and broken anyway. Oh, it's just a mess. It's just an absolute fucking mess, and the longer you pull back the layers on why none of this makes any fucking sense, it, pun very much intended, is a gigantic web of clusterfuckery horseshit, which again, ironically, was trying to tie everything together with canon, but all it actually did was destroy any semblance of continuity in the Spider-Verse films by trying to conform to other continuities that Spider-Verse was never meant to be a part of because it was doing just fucking fine on its own. There's plenty more I have to say about this film, some good but mostly bad regarding the characters and some other plot points, but in the cinema I was mostly okay with this film right up until the twist at the midway point when it decided to completely rip itself apart with the introduction of this gigantic plot hole that basically fucks this entire movie and its premise to pieces and leaves its sequel very little undamaged, that for me personally is worth investing any time in to see. Which again, is a damn shame since I was once looking forward to seeing how the Spider-Verse films would do, and how they would continue despite my issues with the first film. But not so much anymore. The plot is so nonsensical and the canon is so fucked that I've all but entirely soured on this series prior to the conclusion of the trilogy. Honestly, at this point, I don't even know if I'm going to give the third film a chance. If it's even worth giving it the time of day. I look forward to giving you my complete thoughts on this film, however, once the review comes out, but it's just a damn shame, and someone at Sony royally screwed the pooch on this one. Fuck Sony, rip Spider-Verse, and anyone in the angry mob that's currently circulating throughout the internet who's pissy that I didn't cuck to the status quo of brainlet reviewers out there giving this latest overrated Spider-Man abortion a perfect 10 out of 10. Y'all said the same thing about No Way Home when it first came out, and look how long did it take for that movie to age like absolute fucking milk. After a month, people woke the fuck up and realized it was a shallow, fan-fiction, nostalgia-milking disaster, and it actually pains me to say this film might actually be worse than No Way Home. I'm undecided on that personally, and it might take a little longer for certain people to wake the fuck up and realize it, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually. We always do. Anyway, for the majority of you lovely, sane people out there in this audience, thank you very much for watching this video all the way to the end. I appreciate your time as always. You are a legend, and I'll see you next time.